All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining our investor presentation. Today we have with us Kurt Mueffelmann, who's the global COO of archTIS Limited, which is listed on the ASX and also quoted here in the United States on the OTCQB marketplace. The purpose of today's presentation is to provide a general investor update. We'll have an opportunity for a Q&A session at the end of this presentation. If you have any questions leading up to that, at the bottom of your screen, you should see an icon that will allow you to raise your hand. Please do so and we'll field your question and get those on to Kurt. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the reins over to Kurt Mueffelmann as he walks us through the archTIS equity story.
Great, thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone in the United States, and good morning to our friends and investors over in Australia. It's a pleasure to be here today. We've been working with David and his company as we look to expand our investor community into the US, which we find is a really exciting time as we look to strengthen our global presence from archTIS and really looking to support our mantra of trusted to safeguard the world's most sensitive information, which we take very seriously. I just wanted to start, for those of you who are not familiar with me personally, I am the global COO and US president. I am based in the US on the East Coast. I've been in the technology space for 25 years, running everything from small startup to early stage public companies to venture-backed businesses to being one of the top 3 execs in $1 billion NASDAQ company. For the past 15 years, I've really focused on the security space because I think it's an interesting area to be, not only because it's front of the Wall Street Journal, New York Times has tremendous tailwinds, but I think that when we look at how archTIS and the predecessor companies that I've worked with do things, it's a little bit different. And we think that there's a real unique way for us to really build value in a business today. So let me start with that with a little bit of an introduction. So when we talk about safeguarding today's information, what does that mean? We really look at our solutions and our offerings to the market really being a data-centric security technology. We prevent the malicious and accidental loss of information. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means later on in the conversation, but really think of us as protecting the crown jewels of an organization that's out there today. And when we look at archTIS as a company and what we do, we've built these core pillars around our investment value to market from a foundational standpoint. And so we look at where we are today as being tremendous value from an investment standpoint. We're developing repeatable growth through something referred to as annual recurring revenue, or ARR. We obviously have strong market tailwinds. Every day you open up your laptop, your journal, or everything, and someone's been breached or something's been stolen. So the security market is as hot as an industry can be today. We have some outstanding industry-leading partners. When you talk about organizations that have the ability to co-sell with Microsoft or be as tightly integrated as we are today, it's really a way that we are going to be able to bring a product to market in a timely and effective manner. And then we're a global organization. We have global distribution, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So we really think that we're well positioned in the market, and we've shown some early signs of that. Our last fiscal year was a record-setting year. We have a couple of mergers that are looking to continue to drive us moving forward. Not only that we've concluded and we've successfully have merged 2 organizations in, but we have a full pipeline of acquisitions that we look at day in and day out. The nice thing about our offerings is that they're mature in the market. Not to say that they're old. We're out there pushing very leading product innovations on a daily basis, but they're established. So when you look to invest in a technology company, particularly one at the micro cap and early stages, we're not a science experiment that's out there. So we really have those really true product offerings that I'll really talk a lot about because that's a really strong pillar and foundation of where we are. But at the end of the day, unless you have strong product offerings that are being bought by customers, it's meaningless. So we really have a strong marquee global customer base that's out there today from the early stages that cut across a number of vertical industries. So if we look at archTIS, from the heads on, as David mentioned, we're both listed and quoted on the ASX as well as the OTCQB. And we really, again, focus on that securing that information around access, sharing, and collaboration across the enterprise. And collaboration is that new word that's really come into play, particularly over the last, I'd say, 2 years with COVID and the remote worker. But if you really look at how people have worked lately, it's changed, pretty dramatically over that period of time. So when we talk about tailwinds, kind of at the glance, the numbers don't speak for themselves. Having been in the industry for 25 years, I've never seen a CAGR or compounded annual growth rate as high as this. $10 billion provides us a very strong total available market opportunity that's out there today. And so when we look at that, how do we take our core products, which are Cogency and NC Protect, and how do we apply that? And we've looked at providing that across military grade applications, both from the Australian Ministry of Defense and leading into some of the other global defense agencies and defense contractors that are out there today, all the way up to the protected and top secret level. So when we talk about securing the world's most sensitive information, our products are on the war fighters on the front lines today. They're out in special forces. They're out in the dirt. They're getting dirty and making things happen. So obviously you have to be well protected. And then they all rely on the Microsoft underlying technology. So as we look at that to position that growth in that early stage foundation, we're well positioned where we have offices, a corporate office is based out of Canberra, Australia, which is the capital of Australia for those in the US. I'm actually looking forward to making my first journey in 2 years down to Australia in the beginning of March. It'll be my 59th trip down there. So that shows you how familiar I am with working with the Australian technology companies. And I've had a development team down there since the year 2000. So looking forward to getting back down there. Our core US office and presence is based here in Boston. And we also have offices in London and the UK. And we actually, yesterday, we have to update this deck because we now have a subsidiary over in Germany in the DACH region. So as I said, we're still early stage. And so we're, $5 million last fiscal year. That was a tremendous growth from the year before, which really, it's a nice accomplishment to be in the positive. But when we're starting from a low base, we really want to build that foundation as we grow. We are a licensing company. That's what we want to drive. We want to drive that recurring revenue, which generally throws off some significant gross margins. So our gross margins, as we'll talk about when we get deeper into the financials, are 70% and higher. So we really have some strong ability to look at ways of driving that top line. As I mentioned, we have world-class alliances, not only with Microsoft, but a lot of the leading defense contractors out there. So Thales, Raytheon, and a number of others. And we'll go through the marquee customers as we continue the presentation moving forward. So from a financial standpoint, our capital structure, again, we are focused on the ASX. I thought a couple of things are interesting that when you look at where we are today, we are predominantly an Australian retail led organization. But when you look at that breakdown as focused, we've really started to build up our institutional base. That's doubled over the last 12 months. Our board and management, so if we look at the board, the executive team and founders, we're almost at 20% of the shares. So we all have a vested interest in seeing the success of the business moving forward. So we really look at that control of running the day-to-day. We're matching and aligning shareholder interests with those of the executive team. Again, owning those number of shares is really key to what we see as a good story going forward. And our top 40 shareholders almost own 50% of the outstanding shares out there. So it's a really good and strong share registry as we continue to drive that and build that moving forward. When we look at the company history itself, ArchTIS was founded back in 2006 as a services business and worked its way up through a bespoke technology. And finally, in September of 2028, it productized the offering and went public on the ASX. Since that time, we've raised $25 million, which when you think about a technology company today, particularly one that has global reach, that's playing in the space we are, we're finding that a significant number of our competitors are not as capital efficient, that they've raised $50, $100, $200, $250 million to get to the level that we are, both from a revenue and from a product maturity level. The interesting thing also is that we still have $12.5 million of cash on our balance sheet. So we are really capital efficient in the way that we're building this business out, making sure that we're just not throwing money at a problem, but making sure that we have solutions when we drive it. And when we look at this, we can look at what our first half revenue this year for FY22, we are June 30th year end compared to FY21. You see some nice growth from the period over last same period. The nice thing that we're looking at and what we track from a metric standpoint really is our annual recurring revenue. We've doubled that over the last fiscal year, and our goal and objective is to create triple-digit growth year over year within the annual recurring revenue. You notice the gross margins that we've referenced earlier. and where we're driving that. And you start to see where the strategy takes us, pushing across licensing revenue, which has grown dramatically over the trailing 6 months, and driving that almost 200% licensing growth over the period of time. And the nice thing that drives that is really, I think, the foundation of the products and the attention we pay to our customers. We have an extremely low churn rate as 0.1% from last quarter alone. So that's a really strong indicator of the ability for customers to renew. We're a sticky product by nature. Security is generally sticky, but again, you need a good product. You need a product that works and a product that provides value to the customer if you're going to maintain those low churn rates. And we feel like we've accomplished a lot of that already in our early days. So for those that are new to archTIS in the industry, let's talk about what the challenge is out there today. And this is an interesting slide. This is a slide I started building out in December of 2019. I was doing a trip to London, Dubai, and then 3 cities across Australia. And it was really, I was thinking about what's the challenge that organizations are facing today around insider threat. The whole market really has changed because it's really about the way that you work. And obviously COVID-19 has taken that to an entirely new level where people are working at home. They're not working in an office 9 to 5. As we begin to travel, you're going to be working from unsecured networks. You're going to be on multiple devices. You're going to be in a hotel, your customer place. You're going to be in the coffee shop down the street. You're going to be working out of restaurants and what have you. So how we worked has really changed dramatically, but also how we access that data. The data is just not accessed from a single server at your corporate network anymore. It's all over the place, right? You could have file shares that could be hosted on data centers. You could have SharePoint on-prem, some of the core Microsoft technologies that could be a couple of versions back. And now as organizations start to move up into the cloud and to Office 365, your data could be across a couple of different data sets and a couple of different regions. And then you start to get into collaboration solutions of Teams, email, and everything else. You're accessing data all over the place out there today. And so how you collaborate that really changes that cross-channel aspect. And we're really looking at those traditional defenses, which really focused on keeping the bad guys out, creating a perimeter, creating a legacy data loss prevention program around static data doesn't work. We see every day organizations are spending billions and billions more on security, yet every time you open up the newspaper or turn on the news, somebody else has been breached or has had information or intellectual property stolen. And that obviously comes at a huge cost to organizations that are out there today. Where we really focus is on the actual data within an organization. So we focus on something called unstructured data. So that's things such as files, Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, things that really have value. They're difficult to track, they're difficult to secure. And so we have a little bit of a competitive differentiation out there from your traditional security vendor. I'll talk a little bit about the competitive space in a little bit. But when you look at the value behind that, you open up and you see that maybe 200,000 credit cards have been stolen, or someone's had a health data breach of their personal information. That probably gets more information, but at the end of the day, what's the economic value to that, right? It's not as big as Tesla having all their intellectual property plans stolen, 26,000 confidential documents stolen around electric cars. Not only what's the market cap value to that, but what's the reputation loss by having that something in play around that. We look at what's going on over between Russia and the Ukraine. You look at some of the geopolitical challenges that are going on from the theft of intellectual property and military secrets. That obviously goes beyond intellectual properties, reputational harm and market cap. That's when it gets into lives and property and everything else in between. So the stuff that we're securing matters out there today in the market. So let's look a little bit at the technologies and the customers that we have. As I said, we have 2 core products out there today, and we're constantly innovating on those products. The core product on the Microsoft stack sits on top of Microsoft's core technologies. And so NC Protect sits on Microsoft Windows file shares, sits on SharePoint, Microsoft Office 365, Teams, and what have you. And it really provides 3 pillars that provides us the ability to identify and discover information, classify that information down to the document or granular level, secure that information to provide access, and then what are you going to do with that information? And then lastly, audit and report on that compliance, which is very important. When we look at Cogency, which is the core ArchTIS product, which has been really dominant out in the Australian Ministry of Defence and a number of ministries across the Australian government, it's a platform that really allows an organization to collaborate, create, and share sensitive information. So if you look, for instance, one of our good use cases is, how does the Australian Ministry of Defence collaborate with some of the leading supply chain manufacturers that are out there today, whether it's Lockheed, Raytheon, Boeing, EOS? Well, they use Cogency. They want to make sure that they are secure, that they're able to collaborate in a secure environment, which is certified to the top secret and protected layers of classification. So we really deal, again, with that most sensitive information that's out in the world today, protecting us on a day-to-day basis. And as I said, when we look at the overview, we really want to try to have a couple of underpinnings around the technology itself. Security, by its nature, has generally been very confusing and very difficult. So we want to make our products very simple, very fast and easy to use, very little overhead on the end user, and scalable. And so we focus on that advanced information protection area. So again, we look at identifying and classifying that information. We have an intelligent scan engine that goes in and rips apart a document and has the ability to go down and scan down to the byte level of what's actually in that document. And then we can proactively block and protect that information. And that's much different than a lot of the competitors out there today. We have the ability to keep the horse in the barn. And what I mean by that is most organizations will classify and identify the information, and then they'll tell you, hey, Dave has taken 6 documents that he shouldn't have. Well, guess what? Dave has those 6 documents and the horse is out of the barn. With NC Protect and with the ArchTIS solutions, we keep the horse in the barn and let the horse out anytime that he's supposed to, but when he's not supposed to, we don't let him out. And so that's a big differentiator out in the market today. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And where we really kind of focus, and this probably gets down a little bit deeper, but I think it's important because you're going to start hearing more about this in the market. Our key differentiator is around attribute-based access controls. So how can you today, in today's dynamic world, be flexible, be in real time, allow access and sharing of information? So we look at that really in 2 parameters. We look at it from the actual context of the document itself. And so what is in that document? When was it created? Who created it? What department are they from? What location? What sort of date and time is it? And what's the sensitivity of that? Is there any information we need to know about? So those are all attributes that are already built into a system that we can easily ingest and understand. Then we dynamically map that over to the user attributes. We look at, what does the user have? What device are they on? Are they on their corporate laptop? Are they on a mobile device? Are they at a hotel? Are they accessing it through their kid's iPad? Or how are they accessing that information? Who are they? What role are they? What security is it? Are you in Boston opening up a document and all of a sudden the document gets tried to be opened by someone over in Central Europe? Well, then we know those attributes are not matching up. So we dynamically take both those attributes across the content and the user, map them together, and then we present that to the user itself in real time. So if you're a user, you could have different attributes where you could be in your office. Again, you could have one access or one view. You could be down at Starbucks having a cup of coffee and have a different view. You could be on a plane crossing the Atlantic onto Europe or onward and not have access to a document itself. So we really provide that true real-time access and feel to what we do and how we provide that information. And again, this is all based upon attribute access controls. And what keeps it really simple is this is most of the information that's already built and generated in your system. This is not ArchTIS or partners or anybody coming in and building this out. We're just ingesting that information and taking it forward. So we know by looking at the certain data who the user is. We know their name, nationality, security. Very important today, particularly when we start to deal with coalition forces, Five Eyes, NATO, and what have you. Then we know what location they're actually accessing that information from, what network and device they're driving, what data are they looking at, which obviously is very important. What's the policy around that? And then at the end, do we actually approve that access and deny that access? And what do we provide from that? From how do we give them access and what can you do with that information? So I just wanted to show 2 real product slides. Again, I think it's good for people that are not familiar with the company to see that this is real, live, working information that is resident across global entities and global organizations today. So we can proactively control the access. So what we've done is we've taken 2 screenshots. one from an internal user on the left-hand side. Now, this is the same document, the same cloud, the same project team, and we're able basically to go in and give the guest user access into only certain files. And so we look at that and we can say, based upon the rules, and so we have a rules orchestration engine that goes in there and says, okay, a guest user should only have rules that are for public facing, for unsensitive information of the content of who they are and how they're accessing that information. So this is a real live use case that we have today in front of us. And you'll notice that the gentleman on the left has access to all of the information, where the woman on the right doesn't have access to the same information. And so what we talk about is you can't breach what you can't see. In most other cases, most other situations or products that are out there today, the guest user would see it, they'd click on a document and they wouldn't have access to it. It would say access denied. With the ArchTIS set of solutions, you don't even see those documents. So we augment the user experience to make sure that the user doesn't see it. So you can't breach or you can't steal what you can't see. So a really key competitive differentiator out there today. So now let's say you have access to information. So the two areas that I want to talk about on this slide, again, a real life situation, we're doing this with a Fortune 100 company, is when people are admins or administrators, they generally have God-given rights to access any document out there today. Well, if you go back and look at the major breaches, who's the person that's generally guilty of stealing information? It's the admin. And so what we do is we can actually provide the admin the ability to view and see the documents so they can do their job. But if they click on it, again, we give them that note that says that they cannot access it based upon their attributes. Now let's take a different situation where the user in the middle, the internal user, they're in their office, they're accessing the information. They open up a PowerPoint slide and it's a full document that they operate. They can edit, copy, do what they need to do and build new slides. Now this guest user on the right may be in a Starbucks or just looking at information. We can do really cool things such as open this up in a web browser so they cannot do any copy, cut, paste. They cannot download it onto their device. They cannot share it. And if you notice, it's very faint in the background. We can actually put a dynamic watermark in there that has the user's name, the sensitivity of the document, and the date and time. So what does that do? It really does two things. One, it reminds the user that this is sensitive information. And two, it actually deters them from taking a picture of sensitive information with their mobile device if their name is splashed all over it. We probably have half a dozen different active pipeline opportunities with that functionality alone, particularly in the Middle East right now. There seems to be a push on protecting sensitive information. So where that takes us is this allows us the ability to really focus on what our targeted markets are. So we have a targeted market strategy on organizations that generally are more regulated than not. And so if we look at financial services, government and defense, healthcare, manufacturing, even pharma and life sciences, there's about 2 different active use cases that we can drive using the products into from a document or a data-centric security standpoint. And as of that, focusing on that, you can start to see the number of customers that we have. Again, organizations that are protecting intellectual property, organizations that are protecting that information or creating that information barrier that exists between, say, registered reps and the rest of the business. Looking at organizations that may have sensitive architectural drawings, whether they're through nuclear regulators or even through some of the prisons that are out there today, or even looking at power grids of how do you protect that information. And that's all carried through a very strong partnership that we have, where we find that a lot of our larger partners are not only customers, but they also provide sell-to into their customer base as well, from a supply chain management standpoint, as well as bringing it into their customers to make sure that the customer's information that they're communicating and collaborating on are safe today. Not only have we had validation from across those marquee customers I talked about, we really focused on the Australian Ministry of Defence last year. We purposely strategically focused on that because it allowed us to sell significant mid-7-figure opportunities on both product lines into the Australian Ministry of Defence, as well as look at different use cases that carry across coalition forces, Five Eyes, even NATO, that starts to drive a geopolitical market driver, as well as regulatory, particularly around this whole concept of zero trust that's being mandated by an executive order through President Biden. So we really focused on that. And the Australian Ministry of Defence is also a referenceable customer, which is very difficult to find in the security space. Very rarely do you see customers are willing to tout what they use as security solutions for the fear of being breached or being broken into. So to have an organization such as that tout our technologies, we feel very fortunate. So as we go through, let's talk a little bit about the market, because we have some unique positioning around that. If you look at the cybersecurity market today, Okta is a very strong professional services organization out there. There's 3,500 different security organizations in the globe today. And so a lot of them provide technology, a lot of them provide services, a lot of them keep the bad guys out. But as we've read through the papers, it's very difficult to do that. When you look at nation state hacking, the organizations, organized crime, and even your day-to-day hacker, they're very sophisticated. And so when we look at making that shift from the perimeter, not focusing on actually who has access to it, because if you're not already breached, you just don't know it, because people are in looking at your networks, looking at your information. So again, from an ArchTIS standpoint, we take that inside-out approach to protect the crown jewels. And so that puts us in a much different arena around that. And we're really looking to define and control that insider threat around that negligent insider who calls it the oops factor, who compromises data. They could drag a file into the wrong place. How many times have you sent an email to Chris when it should have gone to Christine by mistake, and it has sensitive information in there? I had one earlier today from a company, for a corporate press release that I probably shouldn't have seen. So it goes back to them. But again, no intent or maliciousness around it. It was just a mistake that happened. Malicious insiders, you see those day in and day out. They're out there looking whether maybe someone's changing jobs and they want to take a customer list. Maybe they want to take architectural drawings in the case of Tesla. Maybe they want to look at other ways to harm their organization. It's malicious, it's sabotage, fraud, and it's really an act of corporate espionage that's out there today. And then lastly, the compromised insiders. Those credentials are known stolen. So as I talked about earlier, if I access a document in Boston and 15 minutes later, that same document is accessed by me back in London, there's a bad actor and something's compromised out there today. So we see that. And so when we look at where we're competing, our competitive landscape is really, we try to be more proactive than what traditionally has been out there from a legacy standpoint. The data loss prevention is a very difficult space that has some legacy aspects around it. Limited channel protection and focusing on just components. When you get into collaboration or in-transit documents are very difficult to handle. Governance and compliance, those are the analytics firms that come in, they identify what your documents are, but at the end of the day, they tell you that a breach is happening, but the breach has already taken place. And the last area we really look at is this cloud access security brokers. They are taking that outside-in approach where they're looking at, okay, do we have two-factor authentication? How do we get in here? How do we get into the app? Do we get into the next stage? And then finally, we address the document. So it's a long ways down from that inside-out approach of where we go. As we mentioned earlier, we're looking at a $10 billion market opportunity that's out there today with a little bit over 23% CAGR. Tremendous growth and opportunity as we continue to build this into 2022, 23, and 24. We continue to see the data-centric space continuing to boom as we drive the business forward. So just in the last few minutes, I want to talk a little bit about our business model. We really want to focus on that annual recurring revenue via licensing. So when we look at where we drive markets today, some of you doing research may have noticed, and we've talked a little bit about the Australian Ministry of Defence. Those are large deals. And what we want to do is we want to be true to our shareholder base and not be really contingent or really be relevant on those large deals. We need to build a sustainable recurring business. So yeah, we have a team that's focused on US defense and intelligence. We have a team over in Australia that's focused on that government and defense. But when we look at our core distribution, we really want to focus on those enterprise and corporate small, medium enterprises that drive multiple deals, a more high velocity sale across a number of different use cases out there. So we don't get pigeonholed, or something like COVID doesn't come up and bite us with deals. We don't lose them, but they get pushed out to the right. Those top deals are also very hairy. We're dealing with many, many different agencies, many different audiences, many different buying patterns that are out there today. They take 12, 18, 24 months for that. And so it really takes a while to start to drive those deals. We want to get down into those deals that are 6 months and less. We just looked at a deal the other day that had a 30-day close, high velocity deal, $25,000 dollars, we'll take those all day long because it's building that repeatability. And that repeatability really allows us to build a strong global distribution strategy. And we look at the distribution strategy, we break ours out into really three key areas. We have direct sales in the APAC region, Americas, and EMEA. We have valued channel partners that are out there today that really are twofold. They focus on Microsoft technologies, so they may be going in and working on a digital transformation project. They may be working on taking an organization from on-prem up into the cloud, the 365, or they may be helping them with deploying Microsoft Teams. So we work very closely with them. We also work very closely with a number of security organizations that go around and have a security customer base and taking them in and working with them to expand their security strategy and their security defense in depth around how to protect not only the network that other providers provide, but again, bringing that unique value proposition around the inside and protecting the data center from the inside out on how to do that. And the way that the global channel works is these people already have existing customers. And so we're able to go in, leverage their coattails from a trusted advisor standpoint. So when we come in being brought in, we're not being brought in as something new. We're not being brought in as an unknown. And more importantly, when we get to the point of procurement, we're not being brought in as a new vendor because we're making the purchase through the actual partner itself. Lastly, obviously we have some pretty large strategic alliances out there today. The largest that we have is Microsoft, a big co-sell opportunity. Working with them, we are working with Microsoft's ability to resell our product across any geographical area in the globe. And we see some really strong traction there. And that ties into some of the other defense industrial bases, whether it's Thales or Raytheon that we've worked in the past. I want to touch on Microsoft briefly because just in the last 6 months, we've developed over $5 million of new pipeline with them through the IP co-sell product. And so when we're looking at that, not only are we tightly aligned from a technology standpoint, but also from a field standpoint. So what does that do? That allows us to actually work with Microsoft field reps to help them drive things such as more Azure consumable revenue, more Microsoft Teams platform adoption, driving an increase in monthly active users since they're able to leverage and increase guest access using our products, or even incorporating into something such as Microsoft Sentinel, which is a reporting product out on the backside. So you start to see how this can scale very quickly when we drive it. I was up at 3:30 last Wednesday morning, talking to over 25 defense and intelligence reps across Microsoft's European base and introducing the ArchTIS solutions to them. And again, we work with them through what that sales cycle is. They have existing relationships with their customers, so we're coming in as a value-added partner to discover, provide a proof of concept if needed, optimize, implement that solution, and then optimize and upsell as we go forward. So a tremendous relationship is still in the early stages. From an investor standpoint, ArchTIS really took a proactive role in growing through acquisition. So ArchTIS merged with my former company, Nucleus Cyber, back in December of 2020. And it's been a phenomenal ride where we have brought in a number of new customers and new technologies and really have been able to upsell some of the existing ArchTIS customers in Australia. So we brought in a global distribution strategy and really started to really drive what that is. Last fall, or in September, I should say, we actually brought in some of the certain assets around a product called CipherPoint or CP Protect that really focuses on non-Microsoft encryption. And so we're able to incorporate that into our core technologies and provide not only existing customers with cross-sell and upsell opportunities, but also provide people such as European entities looking for non-Microsoft encryption that want to be deployed on Office 365. So when we go out and look at our pipeline, we really want to look at how we're promoting that remote work, what that dynamic access and sharing is, supply chain compliance and governance. So we really want to be selective in what we're looking for, technology and acquisitions, whether it's through product, global distribution, customer acquisition, but we really want to make sure that it fits into some of these core underlying parameters of what we have today. So just lastly, in summary, kind of our summary slide, we're going to continually grow the business. We are driving top line triple-digit growth from an ARR perspective. That is our goal. That's our #1 board mandate. In every board meeting, every month, that's the thing that we lead off with, is how we're doing that. And that's going to naturally just drive annual recurring revenue, is going to drive that high level of gross margin. That's what we need to focus on. Again, that's going to provide the best return for shareholders moving forward. It's going to provide the best investment for us to reinvest in the business from an operating standpoint. Sales and marketing, listen, there's no better customer out there today than the Australian Ministry of Defense. So how do we leverage that across other regions? We're seeing some early success of that in the US, but that's also carrying across into coalition forces, into Europe, and even across Asia. So we're looking to continually build out that pipeline and opportunities, not only through our own awareness and generation, but through those of channel partners as well as Microsoft. And then lastly, we need to stay right on that cutting edge from a product innovation standpoint. So we need to drive that product superiority. We need to constantly be out there looking for key acquisitions to drive and expand that technology advantage and drive in that exciting development process that keeps people really excited about where we can take the market into the future. So why ArchTIS today? Well, I think we're tremendous value as the top shareholder in the organization. Personally, and CEO Dan Lai is, I believe, the #3 shareholder right now. We feel that the business is really extremely well priced from an enterprise value. We were about an EV of about $43 million, and then to add the $12.5 million on top of our balance sheet. Our ARR, as you saw from the growth charts earlier, is going in the right direction. That's providing those high margins and low churn. I mean, how else can you have a better partnership than having Microsoft's field go out there and sell the product with you? Not only are we going in and bringing them in to help us close deals, but they're bringing us into new opportunities and driving that. Security tailwinds, they're massive out there today. You need to pick the right horse, and providing a data-centric security across a zero trust architecture from a data standpoint will be the place to be. The network security is going to be a challenge out there from the outside in. Protecting the perimeter, it's really all about those crown jewels. And then again, we have an established and scalable distribution strategy that's allowed us through channel partners to scale more effectively and continue to build out the infrastructure as we drive the business forward. So with that, what I'd like to do is to flip it over to David and see if we can open up some questions.
Thank you very much, Kurt. That was an excellent overview, and I think everyone will agree that it was really informative. We do have one question that's popped up in the chat. Can you explain your working relationship with Axiomatics?
Sure. So when we look at products that are out there today, as I said, the ArchTIS products really focus on unstructured data. And so those are documents, PowerPoint, Excel, PDFs, architectural drawings, right? They generally don't have a database behind them. They're not coming out of an ERP or Salesforce.com system. So we focus really on that unstructured side, which is one side of the coin. Now, if you look at products like Axiomatics and a couple of the others that we partner with, they are really focused on that component around the structured data. And so looking at things of taking information and protecting components around Salesforce.com, Dynamics, SAP, different databases, JD Edwards, and what have you. Those are all structured databases that they're protecting. Now, the fit with an Axiomatic or with others is that if we can look at ways of incorporating an orchestrated policy engine, we can start to partner with them to say, okay, we're going to have one policy that's going to cut across all areas of information and data, both from a structured and unstructured standpoint. So we really have high views on some of our third-party partners that are out there today, and Axiomatics is a strong partner that we continue to look at opportunities.
Thank you. One other question that's come in. Can you explain what, if any, is the overall seasonality of the business?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, and it's really, I think, relevant more towards COVID, as what we've seen. When we look at being a June 30th, we find that, our seasonality really varies. And so when we look at June 30th, a lot of Australian entities have a June 30th year end. So Q3, Q4, which is the January through June timeframe, is really buying and selling season. That's when people need to use their budgets. That's when they need to evaluate what they're going to do for the following year. So we really look forward to a strong Q3 and Q4. But where that carries off into, as we continue to leverage that relationship with coalition forces, particularly in the US has a close of September 30th. And so now we jump our efforts from Australia across the Pacific into the US and focus generally on the US Fed markets and try to close business during Q1 of our fiscal year, which is the July to September timeframe, and look at that. And then carrying across into the traditional fiscal year end for a lot of US and European companies, which is December 31st. So we're really trying to drive that. COVID obviously has taken a big impact out of that. And we were rightfully hurt, as long as with every other business. Not that we were losing deals, but deals were getting pushed, budgets were getting slashed. I know we had a large deal at the last minute that got pushed. We were able to get a small number of licenses in December 31st, but they bumped the rest of it into the calendar 2022. So, seasonality, again, we feel really good about where we're set up from a technology standpoint, as well as, from a pipeline and a deal structure standpoint for Q3 and Q4.
Another question, is there a unique value or a selling proposition that ArchTIS has?
Yeah, so when we look at that, our separation is really about how do we proactively and dynamically protect information. And that's through the access of that information, as well as once you have access to that information, what can you do with it? So we're just not alerting and sending out alerts and triggers and notifications to say, hey, information has been taken. So, our true value prop and differentiation in the market is, being proactive around how to protect that data, not just alerting someone to say that someone's already been taking the information, you better go chase them out. So there's a number of different areas, but that's the key one that we drive.
Another question, why did you choose to expand into the US and to seek a quotation on the OTCQB?
Yeah, when we looked at that, so there's a couple of reasons. Obviously, it's the largest economy in the world. 350 million people are out there today. We've had good traction already. And when we look at the investor base, we really want to look at, the value that a US investment base can bring. We've had some really good early stage discussions with some large institutional investors. We just need to build the scale of the business up, as a 50 to 60 million dollar, organization from a market cap company. We're a little bit early for some of the larger entities that we've been talking to and have discussions about. So we really wanted to build that foundation around the OTC. So we wanted to have that availability for the US to have the ability to trade and quote and list on, leveraging off of what we've already done with the ASX and having that vehicle, but also give confidence to US investors coming in that we're serious about it. I think we've seen that through the creation of the US federal business unit that's out there today. The number of people that we have on the street in the US is growing, pretty much on a daily basis. We're out there actively looking for salespeople, a couple of alliance positions to really drive further opportunity with Microsoft and really pushing that through. So the US to us is a good market. Also, the US is very has a little bit different view on valuations around technology. But the valuation is driving technologies around ARR, less around EBITDA and cash. We obviously want to be cognizant of those too, because they are business financial performance metrics that we do take near and dear to our heart. But again, we want to look at ways of how do we get rewarded for building that recurring revenue that becomes much more predictable to the market and drives more top line and more investment back into the business on a regular and recurring basis.
One more question for you. You had mentioned some acquisitions that the company has already made to date. What's next on the acquisition front for ArchTIS that you can speak to?
Yeah, I think one of the questions earlier was about when you look at what's that third-party partners that are out there today. I won't comment on any direct conversations that we have with them, but I think it's intriguing to look at the other side of the coin and look at creating that orchestrated policy engine, particularly as you look at security. I think you look a little bit towards the GRC governance and regulatory compliance space, which is tangential to us, but we overlap very strongly with that. We look at some of the areas around continued focus on defense requirements. In the US, there's a pretty large defense requirement around CMMC and then import-export controls. There are tangential and associated technologies that we look at on a regular basis. We have a pretty full pipeline. I know at the end of last year, we turned down three different mergers. One, it wasn't a product fit. We just didn't see the strategic direction. Two, it wasn't a cultural fit, and we take culture very strongly. We want to make sure that any business we bring in has a cultural fit into what we're doing today. Not only just a business fit, but can we work with the people? We don't want to bring in a person and have to flush them out after we acquire their business. So the cultural fit's important to us. And three, the price was too high. Maybe they'll come back, maybe they won't. But again, we need to be really strong about where we are, particularly since we think our share price right now is pushed down a little bit. And so we want to be cognizant that we're not blowing shares out too cheaply. We want to be cognizant of where we are from a cash position standpoint as we try to build our business. So we saw our best investment was not doing nothing, which sometimes is the best decision. But again, we're out there on a regular basis looking to see how we scale the business up into a larger entity and become a little bit more present on a global basis.
We do have a few more questions. Are there any regulations in the financial space that are seeing requirements that capture any of ArchTIS's offerings?
Yeah, it's funny. When you look at the regulatory space, right, it goes across the board. It is split between different geographical requirements. It's split, across different verticals that are out there today. So we have the ability through our intelligent rules engine to be very flexible. And so we have 200 out of the box rules. Probably half of those are focused on the financial markets. And so things such as keeping information barriers between registered reps and unregistered reps and the rest of the business, looking at things such as is personally identifiable information being shared in even something as easy as chats between organizations or internally around what's going on. So again, we have those organizations that need the regulations to be put into some sort of automated format that will make them a little bit more value in how we provide those solutions to the market, how they fit into the product, and at the end of the day, make it easy for the customers to use. So yeah, the financial, healthcare, what have you, we have solutions for that right out of the box.
Okay, I think that covers all of the Q&A. So Kurt, let me begin by thanking you for making yourself available to our investors and providing this excellent update. And to everybody that's taking the time to join us, we will be emailing you all a pre-recorded link so that you can access this Q&A and the overall presentation anytime in the future. And thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, Kurt, for joining us.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Have a good afternoon and a good day over in Australia. Thank you.